Hello, and welcome to today's Smartkarma webinar in collaboration with ASEAN Exchanges. I'm your host, Sanam Nanwani. Today, I have the pleasure of welcoming analyst Sharmila Whelan, a leading insight provider on Smartkarma. Sharmila is a seasoned global macro strategist with nearly 30 years of experience, advising buy-side clients on multi-asset strategies. Her work bridges geopolitics, macroeconomic trends, and investment insights, with deep expertise across both developed and emerging markets. Today, she will be taking us through her views on ASEAN's energy transition, from carbon emissions trends and national clean energy policies to green financing progress and the region's fastest ESG adopters. Before we begin, a bit of standard housekeeping. As always, please feel free to send in your questions for Sharmila throughout the webinar using the Q&A button on your Zoom app, and we will do our best to get to them during the Q&A section. Please do not reshare the contents of this webinar without express permission. A recording will be available afterwards on the registration page and sent to all attendees. And with that, Sharmila, thank you for being with us today. It'd be lovely if you could give us a brief introduction before we dive right into the topic. The floor is yours.
Hi, Sanam. Thank you very much for the kind introduction and to everyone for dialing in. I hope this will be an interactive session where you'll share your views and comments. I'm very interested to hear what you think. But I think Salma has introduced me very well, so I won't delve into that anymore. Just wanted to lay out how we are going to approach the whole topic because it's a larger one. I wanted to start off by looking at current energy consumption in ASEAN, what the trend is, then go on to look at the energy mixes of the 6 countries under consideration here, which are Singapore, Vietnam, Thailand, Malaysia, Indonesia, and the Philippines. Then go on to look at individual countries in terms of, what are they doing in terms of policies, frameworks that they've got in place, what is the progress being made, what are the achievements, what's happening to green financing, and which industries are leading in the adoption of ESG standards. And then come on to what are the regional cooperation initiatives on the green transition. And finally, to finish off with, who are the regional leaders in terms of renewable power generation and in cutting carbon emissions. So a lot to cover. So without further ado, let's start off. So this is looking at ASEAN primary energy consumption. And you can see it's been on a rising trend, as you would expect, as these countries industrialize and move up the value added chain, as well as the middle class grows and, per capita consumption of energy goes up for among other things due to greater car penetration. The thing to note here is that while to the 10 years to 2023, ASEAN primary energy consumption has been growing on average by 3.5% per annum. Energy consumption, as you can see in Vietnam and the Philippines, has been significantly higher. Having said that, ASEAN energy consumption as a percentage of total global energy consumption is still low at 5%. It's also low compared to China, which accounts for almost a third of global energy consumption, and the Asia Pacific share of 47%. Turning to look at the current energy mix, and here you're looking at the breakdown of consumption by fuel for Indonesia, Vietnam, and Philippines. The things to take away from here is number one is that coal dominates, right, in all 3 countries. Renewables, the share of renewables is pretty low. It's between 7 and 8%. The shares increase if you include hydro and natural gas, which is a relatively clean fossil fuel. For Indonesia, the share rises to 26%, for Vietnam to 28%, and for the Philippines to 17%. But still, the key takeaway remains that these countries are very much dependent on fossil fuels and in particular coal. If we turn to the next set of countries, Singapore, Thailand, and Malaysia. So as you can see there, the picture isn't much better. Sure, they're less reliant on coal, but very much dependent on oil. So in Singapore, for instance, 86% of energy consumed comes from oil, and the share of renewables is just about 1%. In Thailand and Malaysia, the share of renewables is higher, and Thailand's is on par with Vietnam, but still the fact remains coal and oil dominates. So this is what the picture is looking like right now. Turning to look at what's happening to carbon emissions. And what this chart is looking at is carbon emissions measured as millions of tons of CO2 equivalent for the 5 countries. Apologies, I don't have the data for Singapore, but I'll talk around it. As you can see, Indonesia is by far the biggest emitter. The second largest emitter is Vietnam, but the gap between the two of them are significant. It's only in Thailand where carbon emissions are beginning to gently trend down. And the other country where carbon emissions have been coming down are Singapore. But having said that, carbon emissions are rising, but carbon emissions are still low. So in 2023, the ASEAN 5 emitted carbon emissions. The carbon emissions from the ASEAN 5 were 1/6 of those emitted by China, and accounted for 4.6% of global carbon emissions. But ASEAN 6 are neither short on aspiration or in their ambitions. And what you're looking at here are the Paris Climate Accord commitments made by each of the countries. With the exception of Indonesia and Thailand, all other countries are committed to achieving net zero emissions by 2050. And in between, they've got, in the interim to 2030, they've got very ambitious targets. In terms of unconditional targets for carbon emission reduction, it is Singapore, Malaysia, and Indonesia that lead. If you look at conditional, which means that the countries are relying on international funding as well as international technical support, the targets are even more ambitious. And leading here are the Philippines and Malaysia. Turning next to look at what are the policy initiatives and the progress and which are the leading industries. We're going to do this by country because it just seemed easier to do that. So starting with Indonesia, the most populous country in ASEAN. So Indonesia, was very early. It has this national energy policy that was put in place in 2014. The aim is that renewables would be at least 23% of the energy mix by 2025 and 31% by 2050. It's got a long-term strategy for climate resilience, which targets a net carbon sink for forestry and other land use. It's got a sustainable roadmap that has been in place since 2021 that mandates that all financial institutions integrate ESG principles, whether it comes to the issuance of green bonds or sustainability-linked loans. It's also, as of April 2022, introduced a carbon tax and emission trading system. Initially, it was for power, but the plan this year is to expand it to other sectors. It's also got a Just an Energy Transition Partnership, which is about securing international funding to help Indonesia make the transition from coal to renewable energy sources. Now, in terms of progress and achievements, this year, Indonesia is set to fully implement the B40 biodiesel program, which mandates that 40% or 44% palm oil blend in diesel fuel and to reduce dependence on basically imported diesel. It's also developing sustainable industrial clusters powered by clean energy, and they've already launched it for the electric vehicle sector as well as for nickel production. They are offering carbon credits for energy projects. It's also updated its green taxonomy to standardize sustainable finance terminology. In terms of green finance, as some of you might know already, Indonesia was the first country in the world to issue a sovereign green Islamic bond, and that was back in 2018. In 2023, it launched its sovereign blue bonds in the Japanese market, and the aim was to raise financing for marine conservation as well as sustainable fisheries. And since then, it's been issuing green bonds. In terms of which sectors or industries are leading, it's really agriculture and finance. In agriculture, the palm oil industry has adopted, regenerative agricultural practices, to combat the impact of climate change as well as reduce deforestation. In finance, the financial authority now already requires that companies report annually their ESG credentials, and also they set the standards for green bond issuance. In terms of Thailand, turning to Thailand, Thailand also was a fairly early mover. So its first plan was, a couple of plans. It was the Alternative Energy Development Plan, which targets 30% renewable energy in the total energy mix by 2037. The Power Development Plan, which was launched in the same year, which focuses on energy security and economic affordability, environmental sustainability, and has provisions for integrating renewable energy into the economy. Later, even before that, was the energy efficiency plan, which aims to reduce energy intensity by 30% from 2010 levels by 2036. So, and I could go on, but in terms of progress and achievements, Thailand has continued, to expand its renewable energy capacity, and this includes, operation of, hybrid hydro solar power plants, and one of them that stand out is the Serene Doram Dam. In terms of green, it's been issuing green bonds since 2023. In that same year, it was the first in Asia to issue a sovereign sustainability-linked bonds, which aligned debt obligations with environmental performance targets. Now, turning to which industries are leading, it's the energy, automotive, and finance industries. Thailand is a leader in solar energy deployment among ASEAN countries. In terms of cars, the government's target is that all new cars sold by 2035 will be electric. When we move to the finance sector, the stock exchange of Thailand has already put in place compliance requirements for listed companies to report on their ESG compliance credentials. And the upshot of that is that the country has seen a significant increase in ESG fund inflows. Turning to Malaysia, the key policy initiative was the Green Technology Master Plan that runs from 2017 to 2030, which provides the roadmap for green technology development across 6 sectors. And the overall aim is that 40% of electricity generation will come from renewable energy by 2035. There's also the biodiversity policy, which integrates biodiversity considerations into economic development and supporting sustainable practices. There's initiatives in place to help to hasten the transition towards more efficient resources and waste minimizations, as well as uh, I think the most key one is the introduction of premium charges for energy and water usages in the data centers, so that they are encouraged to adopt more renewable energy sources. And this is a big one for those of you who are dialing in from Malaysia or from the region, as because that the whole Johor Singapore economic zone is developing very, very quickly, and a lot of the AI industry is growing there, and as you know, that is a high energy consuming industry. In terms of progress and achievements, this year's budget, its allocation to the National Energy Transition Facilitation Roadmap, I know quite a mouthful, has tripled to 300 million ringgit. At the same time, the budget has also introduced incentives to promote EV adoption, including offering rebates for locally assembled electric motorcycles and investments into EV-related skills development. Malaysia, like Indonesia, has been issuing sukuk bonds, and in particular sustainable and responsible investment bonds since 2023. And these bonds, almost a quarter of them are issued under the ASEAN standards. In terms of leading industries, they are the semiconductors industry, finance, and energy. We've, companies like Intel and Micron that are investing heavily in the semiconductor industry in Penang are incorporating, ESG standards to meet, international global supply chain requirements and requirements back in their own countries. Like in other ASEAN countries, in Malaysia, the Securities Commission and Bursa Malaysia have introduced mandatory sustainability onboarding programs for directors of listed companies. Turning to the Philippines, the Philippines has taken its main framework for the green transition came in the shape of a couple of acts starting in 2008 through 2009. There's the Renewable Energy Act, which offers tax holidays and by way of incentives to encourage the utilization of renewable energy resources, as well as duty-free importation of clean energy equipment. The Biofuels Act of 2006 mandates the blending of biofuels with gasoline and diesel and promoting energy independence as well as rural development. It's already, the Climate Change Commission, it was created back in 2009, and it is in charge of not only coordinating, but also evaluating the effectiveness of climate change programs and action plans. Additionally, it's also introduced the feed-in tariff system, which provides guaranteed payments to renewable energy producers, covering technologies like solar, wind, biomass, and hydropower. Turning to progress and achievement, Indonesia, has been very active in seeking international funding and working with international partners to develop its renewable energy projects. And one of them is, the UAE, where it signed a $15 billion deal with the UAE's masters to develop an energy, a solar wind battery energy storage system, which aims to provide 1 gigawatt of clean energy by 2030. And this, I believe, is already under construction. The other one that's under construction is the solar farm development in Bulacan, and this has a capacity of 3,500 megawatts, which would make it one of the largest solar projects in Southeast Asia. Um, green financing, green financing, as you can see, Indonesia has been issuing green sustainability bonds both within within the Philippines and in US dollar terms, and also in the Japanese market. And Philippines, the commercial banks in the Philippines have been very active in making private placements with green bonds. The leading industries are semiconductors, finance, and energy. As I mentioned already, Philippine banks are increasingly issuing green bonds to fund sustainable projects. And the government has also issued sustainability bonds to finance environmental initiatives. So Philippines is invested in renewable energy projects and is very steadily scaling up its commitments. Turning to Singapore, Singapore's main plan is the Singapore Green Plan 2030, which is a comprehensive roadmap with targets that covers 5 key areas, which are city and nature, energy reset, green economy, sustainable living, and resilient future. It was very early in introducing a carbon tax on large emitters and that was in 2019, and that has been expanded. It also is providing financial support to companies that are energy efficient, which are adopting energy efficient technologies and practices. In terms of progress and achievements, the energy import strategy is a key one. So Singapore plans, given its high dependency on oil, as we discussed earlier, Singapore is making a very firm effort to change their energy mix and plans to import 6 gigawatt of low carbon electricity by 2035. If this succeeds, this would meet about 30% of the country's energy needs. Already trials include electricity from Malaysia, Laos, and Indonesia. The country's also expanding in the solar area and especially solar energy storage. And the aim is to achieve 2 gigawatt peak solar energy by 2030 and deploy 200 megawatts of energy storage systems from 2025 onwards. On transportation initiatives, all new public buses are clean energy buses, and the target is to replace all diesel buses by 2040. In terms of green finance, Singapore has consolidated its position and has positioned itself as the region's green financing hub. In 2023, Singapore reopened its 50-year Green Singapore government securities bond. The Monetary Authority of Singapore, plans to issue 35 billion Singapore dollars worth of green bonds through 2030, and announced a 2.4 billion green bond issuance last year. The MAS has also enhanced cooperation on green finance with China's PBOC, its central bank, and is together developing uh, developing a decarbonization ratings platform. The sectors and industries that are leading in Singapore are finance, real estate, and construction. As I mentioned, Singapore is the regional hub for green finance, and it's also taking the lead in introducing the Singapore Asia taxonomy for sustainable finance across 8 sectors, which include energy, construction, and transportation. On real estate and construction, there's been a concerted effort to promote green building technologies through initiatives like the Green Building Master Plan, the aim of which is to green 80% of Singapore's buildings by 2030. Turning finally to Vietnam, Vietnam's Power Development Plan 8, it aims to increase electricity generation capacity from renewables. It aims to increase overall electricity generation capacity significantly to about at the max to 236 gigawatts by 2030. But within the focus is on increasing the role of renewables like solar, wind, and nuclear energy. Also in place since 2021 is the National Green Growth Strategy, and the aim of that is to reduce greenhouse gas emission by 15% by 2030 and 30% by 2050. Like Malaysia, it also offers fixed prices for electricity generated from renewable sources, and with the aim of encouraging investment in these sectors. It's also got an emissions trading scheme in place, which has been there since 2020, but the pilot phases have been planned through 2022 to 2027, and a full implementation is expected around 2027. In terms of progress and achievement, um, Vietnam aims to generate 50% of total energy from renewable sources by 2045 and has an intermediate target of 47% by 2035. It's revised its energy plan to increase solar's energy share from 16% to 16% from 5%. Again, to help the transition away from coal in particular and also natural gas. Lego, which has opened a $1 billion toy factory in Vietnam, plans to run it entirely on clean energy by early 2026, and it is hoped that it'll serve as a model for sustainable industrial development in Vietnam. Green financing, the country has been issuing green bonds for some time, for the last few years, and last year, Vietcom Bank launched its debut green bond issuance to the value of $80 million. In terms of industries that are leading, it is manufacturing and energy. The government is investing in good ESG practices with an eye to attracting foreign investment and to improving overall sustainability standards. The country has, also made significant strides in renewable energy adoptions, and we'll come back onto this. So we've just kind of gone through, and it's a lot to take in, but a broad overview of country by country initiatives, progress, which sectors are benefiting, which sectors are leaders. But now turning to what are the regional initiatives, and the 3 key ones that stand out are the The first is the ASEAN Power Grid initiatives. So these are projects like the Laos, Thailand, Malaysia, Singapore Power Integration Project and the Borneo, Indonesia, Malaysia, Philippines Power Interconnection Project. And aims of these project initiatives are to facilitate energy trade, and in doing so, support the integration of renewable energy sources. You've also seen, just energy transition partnerships, which I touched upon earlier, and where both, Indonesia and Vietnam have turned to international funding to help them transition away from coal. Also, our international support mechanisms within the region, in particular programs like the Southeast Asia Energy Transition Partnership and the Asian Development Bank's Energy Transition Mechanism. These initiatives or these programs are providing both financial as well as technical assistance to countries. The main beneficiaries have been Philippines, Indonesia, Thailand, and Vietnam. In the private space, just to name a few, because there are so many, there's Semcorp Corporation Industries, which has signed contracts with Aster Chemicals and Energy in Singapore to supply, cleaner energy to refining and chemical complexes in Singapore, and they are jointly also exploring projects throughout Southeast Asia and in particular in Indonesia. Then we got the ASEAN Corporation in the Philippines. It's already invested in renewable energy projects across the region, including wind farms in Indonesia and solar projects in Vietnam. And then we have, of course, Oyika's, the Singapore-based company, which is supported by investments from Thailand and Malaysia, is expanding its battery swapping infrastructure for electric motorbikes across Southeast Asia. So far, so good. Turning to, so there's a lot that's going on, but, the proof is in the pudding in terms of what is the data actually showing. And what we're looking at here are two charts. One that looks at, renewable power generation, which includes hydro here in this instance, and the second one looks at power sector carbon emission reductions, in reductions and who is leading there. And as you can see in the first chart, it is Vietnam that is leading with renewable power generation, and this stands whether you include hydro or exclude hydro. In terms of cutting emissions, Singapore is at the forefront. So to bring it all together, the key takeaways are that ASEAN energy consumption continues to rise as these countries industrialize and get richer, but their total energy consumption as a share of global as well as compared to China remains low. However, coal and oil dominates the energy mix, and the share of renewables is still low. As a result, carbon emissions are rising across countries, bar Thailand and Singapore. But having said that, carbon emissions, when compared with global carbon emissions, are low. Nonetheless, the ASEAN 6 have got very ambitious carbon emission reduction plans in place and are making progress progress in implementing them. They are delivering results. Green financing is growing in Singapore. Vietnam is leading when it comes to power generation from renewable sources, and Indonesia and Singapore in terms of carbon emission actual reductions. So bottom line, ASEAN is moving in the right direction, but it has got some way to go. And I'll stop on that note and hand it back to Sanam so that she can open it up for any questions you might have.
Thank you so much for the insightful presentation, Sharmila. As mentioned earlier, attendees, please do send in your questions for Sharmila using the Q&A box at the bottom of your Zoom app, at the bottom of your screen. Perhaps I can start the Q&A session with a question from our team. Zooming out, how do you see ASEAN's green economy fitting into broader global investment trends? Are there any unique opportunities or structural tailwinds that stand out?
I think, you know, it depends upon a couple of things. I think a few drivers of, the green transition in ASEAN. One is, what we're seeing globally, that the trading in the midst of Trump's trade war, trading patterns are changing, and companies are relocating out of China into ASEAN. Well, that's a trend that's been going on ever since the global financial crisis. And a lot of these are global companies which have to adhere to international ESG standards and compliance requirements of their home country. So if they come to ASEAN, they are going to bring with them clean technology, clean energy technology, and help the overall industrial sector in ASEAN 6 become greener. That's number one. Second is China and ASEAN's being in the same in the same geography as China. I think it benefits hugely because China is, and I've just come back from a 10-day trip to China, a 2-week trip to China, going all over the place. And, green transition there is really happening. And in terms of the technology, they're way ahead of the West and their most cost competitiveness. And they're very much about making the transition inclusive. And especially for BRI countries, which a lot of ASEAN countries are. So ASEAN stands to benefit from, the technological transfer of, clean energy from China to ASEAN countries at a cost competitive price, which matters a lot because the green transition is expensive.
Yeah, that's very interesting. Thank you for that. I see we actually have some questions that have come in from the audience. The first one is, how mature is the green financing ecosystem in ASEAN? And are we seeing enough capital flowing into transition aligned sectors to move the needle meaningfully?
How mature is it? Now, that's the million-dollar question. It's never mature enough. Given, the hundreds of billions of dollars that are required to finance this transition, especially if we are to get to net zero. And 2050 isn't that far off, right? Even though it looks like it is. What would move the needle? I think what is moving the needle is Singapore, right? Singapore is the international financial hub for Southeast Asia, just as Hong Kong was or still is, but less so, the gateway into investment into China, right? And it's what the Singaporean authorities do in terms of deepening the green financing market that really matter from a policy point of view. And they're certainly, as you said, like, they, as we discussed, they're doing all the right things. And there is no reason why the green financing shouldn't take off, because the other point to make about ASEAN or Asia in general compared to, say, the US or Europe, Asia is the saving is a high household savings is a high household savings rate. So the savings rate is there to be deployed into you know green bonds, into green financial instruments. While in the US, green transition is on the back burner with with Trump in office. In Europe, the savings rate, like in the US, is low compared to Asia. And also now they've got massive obligations to increase defense spending. So ASEAN actually, when you look at it, so I don't have a number for you in terms of the maturity or what is this specific number. But what I'm saying is the prospects for the green financing market centered around Singapore to grow are very, very positive.
Got it. Thank you. Another question that has come through is, for long-term investors, what role do you see the energy transition playing in future portfolio construction, especially in navigating climate risk and shifting demand patterns?
Ooh, that is a tricky one because it depends where you are invested, right? And where you are invested and how your portfolio is constructed, if it's a global portfolio. So, for instance, if you are talking about the US, I would say I am a sell my I have an underweight on all renewables companies and overweight on all oil companies simply because of the Biden era moratorium on gas and oil exploration being lifted. So if you're in Europe, I'd still also be underweight renewables simply because Europe is going to struggle to finance the green transition and defense spending is going to take over as a priority. If you're looking at Asia, I would be, from the medium to long term, because I think Asia is making strides and will continue to make strides. I would be incorporating clean energy, clean tech companies, both hardware as well as software, um, and companies that are incorporating ESG adhering to ESG compliance requirements.
Brilliant. Thank you. Um, I think we have time for one last question. That is, if you had to recommend one mindset shift that investors should adopt when thinking about ASEAN's green economy, what would that be?
Hmm. That is a very good question. As you can see, like I'm buying time to answer the question. If you, I would say, if you are a portfolio manager with a portfolio which is very, where, your mandate is sustainable investment and clean energy, right? Say that is a priority or a key mandate in your portfolio. I'd definitely be looking at ASEAN and I probably shouldn't be saying this here, more than that, China.
Okay. Thank you for that. And that brings us to the end of today's webinar. Thank you so much for your time today, Sharmila, and a big thank you to everyone who joined us. If you'd like to keep track of Sharmila's work, I highly recommend following her profile on Smartkarma so you never miss any of her insights. I've shared the link in the chat box for your reference. Lastly, if you have any other questions or comments, feel free to reach out to us at research@smartkarma.com. That's it from us today. Thank you again, Sharmila, and thank you all for attending. Have a great week ahead, everyone. Q.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Sanam. And to add my thanks to everybody who participated and for the great questions that, certainly got me thinking. So thank you very much. And, also please, I should have put this on the last page, clearly completely forgot. Of course, reach out through Smart Karma, and I hope you will read my insights, but also feel very free to reach out to me directly. And maybe Sanam can share the email link, but it is sharmila.whelan at westbourne-research.com. Now that was long to remember, but Sanam, if you could share it with the participants today. And please, if you have any questions about, my global portfolio allocations and calls and topics that are all on every investor's mind at the moment, just reach out. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.